ಎಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ ನಮಸ್ಕಾರಗಳು. ಇಟ್ಸ್ ಅ ಗ್ರೇಟ್ ಅಪರ್ಚುನಿಟಿ ಫಾರ್ ಮೀ given by D. Achyut Rao, History Endowment Director, Prasanna Achyut Rao. I thank him and also my teachers, Professor S. Shetters Madam, my elders, my Guru Dr. Ravi Kursetter. I miss my teacher today. I am here because Professor Shetter, he brought me to Bangalore. So I am thankful to him for all my achievement. Today we have a new book to the academia world. Early Buddhist artisans and their architectural vocabulary. This is actually basically collection of Professor Shetter's articles and also additional 2 articles precisely written for this book. And it is field-based, completely field-based and thoroughly researched work on the Buddhist artisans who actually played a vital role in the early history of India. Before that, I would like to mention that Professor Shetter's contribution to the Karnataka and Indian history is immense. As a chairman of ICHR, he established 2 regional centers, one in Bangalore, Southern Regional Center of ICHR, which is located in Central College, and in the last 21 years, it has contributed a lot under the guidance of our chairman as well as the Professor S. Shetter. So I thank him because he brought the regional center to Bangalore and it has achieved a lot for the historical research in South India. And also I would like to mention that Professor Shetter's contribution to the history, particularly those who are well versed with the art history, archaeology and philosophical history and linguistic recently languages, he has tremendously contributed and he has enriched our knowledge by giving his new thoughts and new ideas on the various aspects of history. So, today we have, all of us we know Karnataka, Kannada, Shastriya Sthanamana, whatever we have classical position which we got it because of Professor Shetter's Kannada book. That has actually one of the reason the government of India has recognized Kannada is one of the classical language and it was given the position to the that's also there. Many scholars may not be knowing that one day it happens, he was talking to us, everybody used to talk about Kaviraja Marga. Kaviraja Margadalli ಗೋದಾವರಿಯಿಂದ ಕಾವೇರಿವರೆಗೆ. So that was the boundary which we used to very proudly, we used to tell that this is Karnataka which from the Godavari to Kaveri. But he pointed out, if you say Kaveri, Mysore is behind the Kaveri. You want to lose the Mysore? He asked the question. Suddenly people they thought, oh yes, we will lose, suppose we say only Kaveri and we will lose the that is most of our capital city for many centuries. So that is how he gave a new version of Kannada identity. And he said that not only the end of the Kaveri is behind Kaveri, Kannada was the very peculiar. Even Ooty, even the Kaveri Valley, that is also part of Karnataka. And that is how he has brought the antiquity of Karnataka and try to understand how antiquity of Karnataka should be looked from the linguistic, from the various aspects of languages, and this is how he has developed a new version of Kannada identity. That's how we got a new version of Kannada identity, Kannada history, early history particularly. That's how he has developed and he has given us a good knowledge of Halegannada, how we should learn from the ancient scripts and particularly the artisans who actually build the Kannada identity. Whatever we talk about the dynasty, he said behind the dynasty one should go. The dynastic rulers may won the wars, but the real war actually done by artisans who actually cultivated the script, cultivated the language. They went behind the boundaries and they created the identity of Kannada and Karnataka. So that is how we are very proud. Today we are in Kannada, Karnataka, where we can say that not only Tamil, in Karnataka is also much older. Recently I was telling is one of the oldest script actually in South India we got before the any other our neighbors. Karnataka was the first opportunity to develop a script, its own original script, and that's how he has made us a very good knowledge about our Karnataka and Kannada history, particularly our knowledge of the ancient Karnataka. So with this, I would like to mention that as a chairman of ICHR, Indian Council of Historical, for 3 years he served in 1996 to 99, and he has a tremendous changes he brought to the council, what we call it ICHR. He revived the journal. Journal used to be very dead, that time, and he revived and he brought them, the journals, into the very limelight. The number of publications, Professor Roddam sir was telling, the railway construction of railways, freedom movement, and partition was the one of the major work, and Indian archaeology for 50 years of India independent. That was the the celebration of India's 50 years. That time Professor Kori Shettar and Shettar together they edited 5 volumes on the Indian archaeology retrospect. That is how they want to look at how India has achieved in the archaeological part. They reviewed the many, brought into 5 volumes. That was a bigger achievement by Professor Shettar's time for ICHR. So for that angle, I am very happy to tell that Professor Shettar's, I was one of the student in MA. I studied under Professor Shettar's for my MA. When he was in the university, nobody has a dare to enter his room. That was the kind of a scholar, and also we used to be very we used to attend to the classes, and we was one of the examiner for my PhD. So I was lucky to be with Professor Shettar. So with this background, I would like to introduce this today's book. This is very great opportunity. I was also part of the Professor Shettar's field work at Sannati, and last year sir wanted to visit. So I also requested, sir, can I also join? He said, okay, please come. And so I also went with Professor Shettar. And he has, what we have seen, but sir has seen a different eyes. That's what I read it in this book. This book has 6 chapters, very important chapters. And 4 are actually, they have published earlier. Somehow, sir has already written in his preface. 4 articles were published, but he has revised and condensed and brought into this book. And 2 different, very beautiful articles he has published in these 2 articles in this book. And it has a different idea so far. Whatever we had, ideas. For example, those who are well versed with the archaeological, particularly architectural history, this is a new idea he has brought to whatever we have. Architecture means in India, temple architecture. Maximum we know temple architecture means the Garbhagriha, Antarala, and when we come to the stupa, Buddhist architecture, we talk about Vihara, Chaitya and Stupa. But sir has gone behind that. He tried to say that who actually the responsible for the making a vocabulary, because sir was telling, Professor Shettar tells that Buddhist, in the beginning, first sentence he mentioned, Buddhists were the first one to introduce the architecture, the monuments to the world, and particularly India. And though actually those were not aware of many of the terminology, but they brought the terminology which till today we are using the same terminology in architectural history. So that is how he has made an immense study on the various aspects of this. I would like to read 1 or 2 important aspects of first chapter. Is the actual first and second chapter are the one chapter, but divided into 2. It talks about the early artisans in history. Basically, Professor Shettar wants to speak, Ashoka the Great, what we call Maurya emperor. Whatever Ashoka wanted to tell, Professor Shettar has, Ashoka has spoke whatever he wanted through Professor Shettar. And there one can easily identify uh, different idea how artisans in ancient India, artisans, Professor Shetter divides into 6 categories. That is very interesting for us. We thought that only artisans is one group. No, he said that there were 6 category can be divided. One is called local artisans who had designed from the distance. They were actually descendant from the Harappan legacy. They were a part of the script writer kind of things. And second one is indigenous artisans who, you know, those actually part of the Gandhara area, present Afghanistan area. They were influenced by the Persian culture, the writing skills and other things. That's why we get Kharoshti, Greek scripts also, language also. And there was third one categories, it talks about rural artisans who were the traditional bound, committed to the local aspirations. And fourth one is descendant from the West Asian artisans, particularly the border area. Fifth one is artists, purists. Both they were the indigenous and who were well versed, willing to change their style. They were the major one. And the sixth category is the new generation, who the artisans who were the willing to work any project using any medium, traveling to any part of the empire. That is specifically, you know, divides into 6 categories. And sir's idea is the entire Ashokan inscriptions, you know, they are, you know, pillar rock edict or minor rock edict, major edict. All of them he examines very carefully how to study them. He makes the very clear idea that Ashoka's inscriptions are, you know, very interestingly, they have a bilingual, Brahmi Prakrit, many of them, Kharoshti Prakrit. Some are only one language, Aramaic, and fourth category is Greek, Aramaic, and Greek, only Greek. And also these are the you know, kind of classifications he has done. What Ashoka wanted to tell, Professor Shetter has put into the book the adaptation of different Prakrit dialects. This is very interesting. The Prakrit means they are, you know, nationalized language was introduced during the Ashoka's time. But within the inscriptions also we find the local regional dialect in the inscriptions. That is what he has pointed out. And also the transfer of imperial orders, whatever Ashoka wanted to tell to the public, is you know, subjects, is the people, those were told through the rock edicts. That's what he tried to analyze that. No, those are all the important aspects of that. And also interestingly, Professor Shetter's you know, identity, you know, he tried to identify whether they were the schools, they were the school of thoughts for the artisans. They are artisans, they are not just, you know, they had to be trained. Then only they can go to these different places. The first time I see that, you know, he identified them, some, you know, kind of thoughts or schools were established. They were, one is in Takshashila, so that the artisans will come there, they will be given a training, what kind of a script should be there written, how should be trained to the, explained to the public. That is how he has identified some place where the centers, we call it, where the artisans were given a training. One is in the Takshashila, major part, Pataliputra, Chunar, Mathura, Varanasi, Kosambi, and goes on various places. And in one of the interesting you know, subject, he talks about whether the slavery was existed in during the you know, Ashoka types. Contemporary, you can just see Roman area, Roman period, the what you call slavery was existed. Whereas in India was the, you know, slavery was existed or not. These questions himself he poses, and he tried to identify whether slavery was existed in ancient India. But he identified similar word. It is called Samadhama. This is the word they identified by the scholars. Samadhama is a slavery, but he say that Samadhama is not a slavery. It is a wage, earned wage, you know, wage. So this what you call in Kannada, we call Kuligara or Kuli Kelsa Mado. Andre those who are taking a wage and they work for them. Samadhama. So interpretation is very, very peculiar, and also try to, you know, identify various aspects of ancient India. And interestingly, he has also identified, for the first time, he mentions in his book, for the first time, the one, you know, Shishya, what you call student or people, he identify himself with the Guru. like, today's we also talk about how I am a student of Shettar, like that. The ancient period, in one of the inscriptions, the Aksha is the one student name. He say that I am a student of Sadjada. This is the Guru's name. Sadjaja is the name, and he tells that for the first time we come across in India, the Guru and Shishya given in, Shishya recognized himself by the Guru's name. So that's a very interesting, these kind of very interesting chapters, interesting points. He has minute work one can identify, and most of these research based on original inscriptions or original text. That is how the peculiarity of the Professor Shettar's work is. He never trusts the secondary, but he reads them, but he goes to the original. That is how one scholar, like me, I really admire Professor Shettar's. He goes to, even you talk about whatever but he will go to the original text. He reads himself and he understands whether this the terminology which is interpretation is correct or wrong, or he will interpret a different way. That's why this kind of work, yes, one aspect Professor Shettar also talks about Ashoka, whether he was an imitator, because the inscriptions were written simultaneously in different places. He was an imitator or an inventor. Whether this is a very, very good question which I found it. He tried to understand, it's very interesting. He takes the one episode when Ashoka, after the Kalinga war, he visits the one place, Sambabodhi is the place, and where he sees the Persian area, the inscriptions were written, Persian monuments, stone monuments of the King Darius in the upper Indus area, and he realized these are the permanent, monument. It will be live long for many centuries. That's why he has got inspiration from the King Darius Persian upper Indus area, and most of the inscriptions he get it carved on the boulders or pillars for the permanently. It should be visible for the many centuries. That's what he conclude that Ashoka probably making use of the trained Archimedes artisans, because he got the inspirations from them and he employed those artisans in the beginning, and later he created Mauryan, Indian artisans trained on that, and he spread to the all over India. That is how the artisans actually made the contribution to the Indian art. That's what he tried to analyze that one. So two more chapters, one on the Buddhist artisans, one is a vocabulary, two different articles. He talks in the fourth chapter about the artisans. He tried to analyze the terminology which was used in the epigraphical, contemporary epigraphical. He not only takes cave temples of the Western India, he takes the various inscriptions of Prakrit inscriptions. He analyzed the artisans' names. Number of Acharya, those are Sanskrit words, Prakrit words also analyzed, and he gives their work, their nature of functions, how they were, the two category makes. One is supervisor category, one is the Shramika category. Those are actually in the field, they cover, like what you call today's, Maisan, and the constructions, Maisan, and the real, workers. The two category, simultaneously they made this contribution to the, not only cave temples, not only structural temples. He tried to analyze how these different classifications of class of artisans, they brought the monument, a Buddhist monument, into the world famous. For example, Sanchi, maybe Kanaganalli, various Western caves, cave Canary, Ajanta. These are how they were brought by the Buddhist artisans. That is how one category talks. The fifth chapter, it talks about the various vocabulary created by the artisans. We talk about stupa. Actually, in the inscription, they are not talk about the stupa as a stupa, but they call it tuba. But these are the words which is very peculiar because we are well versed with the Sanskrit words. Like for example, Vedike we call it, but Vedike is not a Sanskrit word. Prakrit word. In the Buddhist period, what kind of terminology they were using, he tries to use the same word so that we feel that we are in the part of the ancient Prakrit period. So that's why he tried to tell the scholars, use the same word what they were using in the, we should not change into the Sanskritization. That's how he has brought the vocabulary. And interestingly, one last one I would like to tell that my own experience. Sir was not well. Vikram Hospital, sir was there. I went to see him that time. He told me, only 2 minutes we spoke, sir, how are you? And then he said, after that we talk about sir started talking about the Ayaka's, pillars. I was not aware of. After that, reading this one, I realized, sir, what he was. Interestingly, one example I will tell you that Ayaka pillars are very, foremost formation of the stupa architecture in India, particularly South India. Ayaka pillars are the, basic, we get in the most of the Amravati, we get most of the stupa architecture. Those are the beginning of the 4 cardinal directions. They will be, raised. They will be put on the platform, and they are the indications of the 5 elements of 5 episodes of Gautama Buddha. Birth, various, various 5 episodes of the Buddhas. They are the representations. But what is in his book, it argues that Ayaka's pillars actually in the most of the 1830s. The various scholars like various scholars like Burgess or Ferguson, many people they identify this Ayaka Stambha in cardinal directions. They are the part of the Dwara, the gates. They are the part. They are through that the bhaktas or whatever bhikkhus they used to enter. But he said that no, that is not the case. Ayaka Stambhas, Ayaka pillars, they were only the indication of 5 elements, 5 episodes of Gautam Buddha. They are not a part of the Dwaras. And he clearly mentioned that only in the Kanaganalli we have a platform, and Ayaka Stambha is supposed to be 5, but in Kanaganalli we have only 4 stambhas. He tried to understand why there is a one missing, and he said that fourth one, the 4 are raised, but 5th one is Gautama's big sculptures are put there. Instead of Kamba, they put a sculpture of the Buddha. That's why in Kanaganalli we get a large size Gautama Buddha's sculpture. That is a part of the Ayaka Stambha, the platform, and those are not part of the temple. They are the not part of the Dwaras, gate Toranas. They are the part of the worshipping place when the bhikkhus or Buddhist priest, they used to take a round in the Pradakshina Patha. They offer flowers in the Ayaka Stambha. That is a part of the worshipping place, not the entrance. That is a very interesting. For the first time, we understand almost 1830 onwards. Most of the scholars discuss about Ayaka Stambha as an entrance, but Professor Shetter's argument is that they are not a part of the Toranas. They are the platform where the Buddhists they worship, and that is a worshipping place. For the first time, we come across a new idea of understanding of Buddhist architecture and artisans, various classifications. He has mentioned that this is exclusively written for the early history, particularly those who are well versed with the Buddhist architecture, art history. I think this is one of the monumental contribution for the scholars, those who would like, even for the for example, subaltern studies, what Professor Rajendra Chenni in his forward note, he has mentioned that these are the kind of new ideas. The working class people are recognized by the scholar historian in the ancient India, how they functions, how they contributed for the growth of our culture. It should be seen through this kind of new idea of study. This is how Professor Shetter's contribution. We could see how the working class people are part of in the history, how they should be given a position in the history. That is how he has looked into this. So with this few words, I thank organizers, I thank Bangalore Central Institute of Center, and also thank Professor Chenni sir for giving me opportunity. Thank you one and all. Thank you very much.